strange OVO markings that appears on these representations. Shroud researchers can't figure out what the OVO represents. I believe that the OVO is the same as the OVO that's seen on the face of the Illumined ones, of the Illuminati. And ultimately what it represents is the Stargate glasses, the way to see the neutrinos, to understand the secret of the blue apples, and how to perceive the ultimate secrets of God, the secrets of light. Our universe starts with a tiny dot, it becomes a line, it becomes a plane, and then it becomes a three-dimensional universe. And one way that we can begin to apprehend these mysteries is by taking one step backward in terms of how we approach our world. Have you all ever seen this before? What is it? It's a Necker cube, right? Yeah, very good. What else is it? Anything? Okay. What would the science teacher tell us this pen really is? Well, what he'd say is it's a collection of atoms, molecules, it's energy and emotion, all brought to life in our imagination, and we agree that it's solid like this podium, and like you and me. But in reality, there's nothing solid about any of this. We all agree that this exists, but it's all brought to life in our imagination. And at the very deepest level, what this is a collection of atoms and molecules that originally came out of a neutrino, out of a blue apple, that's now brought to life in this particular form. But now we're coming into an area where we can redesign this form. We can harness that power, and we may choose to add an extension into our world, similar to the depiction of the nanotechnology conference logo I just showed. We will be going from a three-dimensional world into a fourth-dimensional world, where things that are invisible are brought into the visible. This brings about something called the apokatastasis, the restoration. Apo is the root for apple, and it happens to mean far away. And I believe that the restoration is upon us. That right now we stand on the edge of a new Atlantis with the 4 power tools in our hands, and just within our reach are the shining blue apples that represent our ultimate destiny. And we're coming into a phase individually and collectively where if we choose Tara as opposed to terror, we will be able to step into this new beginning, and we will be able to reach up to this tree of life, pull the blue apples down, and bring them into our being. So I want to thank you very much for sharing this time with me and allowing me to share this information with you. With some of the time left, I'd like to entertain any questions that you might have, or if I can clarify. I would appreciate it if you could step up a little bit closer to me here so I can hear the question. I'll be happy to entertain the questions as long as I can.
Standing back there, barely able to contain myself, I'd like to propose Genesis as meaning gene of Isis. There was something put into our pineal gland by the Anunnaki that is all related to the blue apples. The pineal gland is actually crystals, literally in our brain, or stones. The blue is another explanation. I know why they're blue, but it's too much. Power is up to our pineal gland specifically, also which will connect with the pituitary and start vibrating. That's what that seashell was about with the saddle of the pituitary gland. Something has been put in our brain which was literally a crystal, and through cyber biology it has become organic. And we are at the verge now of going to the next step.
Right. I feel that once we ignite those centers within the brain, once our blue apple within is ignited, that we will have the ability within us to manipulate matter. I mean, you think about the 8 great abilities that the gods had, that the illumined ones, the shining ones, the Anunnaki possessed. Part of it was manipulating matter, invisibility. Now, that doesn't mean they were making, they might have had some kind of a cloaking device that they wore that made them invisible, but it could also be that they made themselves invisible by going into the nano world. and are standing right beside me right now, and we don't even know it.
I'm a student of the Rosicrucian Fellowship down in Oceanside. The two higher ethers that we possess, it's all connected in with this, and communion. The highest ether is the reflecting ether, and that's the nano world, where you can see all that is and all that was. Now,
and all that shall be.
All that shall be. I have so much to say. I should probably write a book myself. Because what this has done for me has made. This came as a notion. Actually, a girlfriend of mine who lives very close to you in Nashville, but she's from here originally, and she said she came up with the gene of Isis, meaning Genesis, and then she took it a step farther by connecting the pineal gland, which is common knowledge.
Right. There's a great book that's called Gen Isis that was by David Wood that's all about Rennes-le-Chateau that addresses a lot of what you're talking about. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the messages that I have is that this is a lot about consciousness. Once we tune into this, you're going to start seeing blue apples in your dreams, and you're going to start experiencing the flow of synchronicity that will bring you to the awareness that you're at.
Blue apples are actually, what blue apples are, it's the crystals in our pineal gland. And at Rennes-le-Chateau in these places, the elements are there.
Right.
Literally in the ground, that we will be able to transmute in our brain.
Yeah, maybe you didn't hear when I said that when you walk the land in Rennes-le-Chateau, in southern France, the Languedoc, you're literally bringing that into your being that's putting you in. Yes, it is.
It has to be done through us also.
Right.
It has to be done.
Sure, you have to be open to it, aware of it, and sure.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very nice. That's great. Yes, sir. Would you mind standing up and?
You're familiar with Fulcanelli?
Yes, I am.
Yes. And you know of the chapel for the two Marys in northern Spain, where Spain connects on with France? It's in the Basque village.
Right.
It's a tower to the end of time.
Yeah, the
Activity took place.
the cross of Hendaye.
Of last year.
Right.
It was prophesied to.
Right.
And the tower looks very much like the tower that you talked about.
Yes, it does.
For the Ark of the Covenant. I wonder if you would comment on the Church of the Two Marys, the legend of that, if that ties in.
I'm not as familiar with that legend of the Church of the Two Marys, but I am familiar with the Hendaye cross that says that corresponds, some research believe, with the Mayan prophecy of 2012, that this cross at Hendaye in southern France says that our world will be destroyed in 2012. But actually, the current thinking is really more that it's going to be a rebirth, cosmogenesis, as John Major Jenkins says, a renewal, and as I describe it, as an apokatastasis brought about by the discovery of these blue apples.
Yeah, well, quickly, the Church of the Two Marys is an ancient church. It's blackened by candle. They have a festival every year where they go down to the shoreline carrying the statues of the two Marys, which was Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene.
Right.
Who supposedly came here.
There's a third one, though. You have to bring in the third Mary. There's always three Marys.
That's right, there was a third Mary out
Right.
of Egypt. Right.
So,
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that to attention because it
Thank you.
ties into the tower.
right. Yeah, very good.
Much like the ring towers.
I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to mention to you, well, last Saturday at the other thing, you had a tower that Saddam Hussein had in Iraq. I spent 15 months in Serbia, and the first thing that we bombed in Serbia was Avila Mountain, the top of which sits Avila Tower, which was identical to that tower that you showed in that picture.
Interesting.
Also in Serbia, there's a place called Tata that borders Bosnia.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, we're always going to these places, Kosovo, Serbia, that have these kind of interesting connections with this type of a story, and I'm always curious about.
Well, Kosovo, Serbia was the foundation of the Orthodox Church. So it's,
Right.
It was everywhere when I was there.
Interesting. Thank you.
Miss,
Yes, ma'am. Right here in front. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question. When you were relating the blue apples, at one point somebody was feeding them to people, and then also they were diamonds and jewels and
Right.
sapphires. I'm having a little trouble understanding why they could be crystals and yet edible.
Well, what I was asking, is it possible that the crystals, that the diamonds are simply the blue apples? And I think I was making the point that it's possible that it could be these things, that lapis was very prominently used in a lot of religions, Egypt, elsewhere. But I was pointing those out as possibilities. Zechariah Sitchin, again, thought they were cobalt. But I don't think it's any of those things. I think it's possible that they might have an interest in those things, but I put those up to say that they weren't those things. That blue apples are actually some other different kind of a blue stone, which actually is a blue tone, frequency, or vibration, a flash, a ray, and that's what we're actually looking for here. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Are blue apples a symbolic symbol of blue grapes?
Yes.
Same thing.
Yes.
Mr. Henley, let me also say that when I mentioned this pineal gland again, the scientists call the pineal from pine cone because it's convoluted, but actually that could be a cluster of grapes also.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Detroit where people said pine cone. Like you want to go swimming at Pine Lake? And then I moved to Nashville and they say, well, look over there at the pine tree. And it took me a while to realize that pine tree is the same as a pine tree where I grew up. And so when you say a pine cone, we might be talking about something that grows underneath the pine tree. Or we might be talking about something that Pan has to do with, the priest king of Atlantis. And the Pan cone, in this case, would be a cone, a vortex. And so, what I do is and I have a book about this called The Language of the Birds, which is the way that these myths and scriptures refer to many things up and down the limit. I mean, you can say that the blue apples is the pineal gland, and we could argue for years about that. The answer is that yes, you're absolutely correct. But there are also a whole list of other things that all respond or are in resonance with this similar concept. And it's only when, and the gentleman mentioned Falconelli, he was one of the alchemists that utilized the language of the birds. And this was thought to be the original pre-flood language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's English. And the reason that it's English is because English is the language of the angels. And I like to point out that the language of the birds is also the language of the poets, who in Ireland are called bards. So the language of the birds is the language of the bards, who are poets. But if you ask a child to pronounce the word bird, they're not going to say bird, they're going to say bud. How many kids, and have their kids ever say, oh, look at the bud? It's a bud, it's a plane. So, the language of the birds and the bards is the language of the buds. Well, who are the buds? The buds are the Buddhas. And what does Buddha mean? Buddha means enlightened one, awakened one. So in this language, which is English, looking at ancient myths and words through the language of English, we bring the illumination that brings it all together and helps us understand how to climb this ladder. And so in that sense, the pine, or the pineal gland, as they say in the South, is the pineal gland elsewhere, and it's all the same thing, and the references go off and just keep going and going and going, like the Energizer Bunny. And so when James Arthur gets up and talks about the pine cone, he's talking about the cone of Pan. And the Pan is the king of Atlantis, and the cone that he has is his vortex, or his Stargate. That's just my take on it. So, a couple more questions. Let me go over here.
I would like to interject that the birds have the capability to lock in on the ley lines, and that's how they find their paths.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, sure. Yes, ma'am.
I have three things to suggest here. There was a master dowser who is now deceased, whose name was Vince Weiberg. And in his dowsing classes, he used that G symbol to rechannel geopathic energy.
Neat.
And when he went to
As above, so below. So the G's the galaxy, but also tunes the...
If there's a geopath that's entering your home, he would bury this G symbol on a plate in the ground. So that as the energy came in, it would be trapped in the symbol.
Wow.
When he went to South America, he saw that symbol repeated all around the bases of the pyramids. And he believed that it was to contain the energy within the structure of the pyramid.
Wow. So the cone, the pine cone again, the pyramid, collects the energy, and it collects it in the G, but the energy it collects is the energy of the galaxy originally, right? I mean, is that...
Well, I'm not sure which direction the G's were pointing
Okay.
in the base.
Uh-huh.
But I believe he said that was to contain it within the pyramid so
Right.
that it wasn't radiating out from it on the sides. Also,